Okay, thing says we're live. Got anybody alive in the chat right now? I hope everybody's doing all right. We got a few minutes till we get started here. This shirt was in a donation pile for Goodwill. It was the maximum amount of effort I was willing to put into the Luau theme. And yeah, just kind of here ready to be a nerd, I guess. Wow, I went live and the viewer count dropped to nothing. Good lord. Is my voice that bad? Let's see here. Well, I don't have a coconut bra, but if anybody wants to donate one to me, I will happily put it on for you guys. Oh. Just trying to make another announcement on Facebook on it, and so you got about 4 more minutes before we get started here. Well, hello. You know, honestly, it's 4 letters. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that without butchering it, and I apologize. I feel like I should not even try. Joao? I apologize for my ignorance to the world. Before we do get started, just for anybody who does have interest in any particular Lua or show file automation related topics, feel free to leave comments of them as we go, and I will I'll take some notes and try to hit as many of them as are doable as we go along. Make a little list over here somewhere. Hello, Michael. Hello, Thomas. Let's see. Need more caffeine. I guess I could have like put a little more effort into this and like found music that I could have used, but well, I didn't. Load string in the library. Yeah, Michael, go ahead and let's hear it, see it, something. I don't know. Oh god, oh god. Right, I was going to share this post before we get going here. Okay. Yeah, yes. I will be going, Michael, I will be going over the ways that I handle adding in my library code. And yes, absolutely. We'll get into that, but my library actually usually lives in a separate plugin. It's only for when I distribute plugins that I put it all together in one script, just to make it a little bit easier so people don't have to have multiple things in there, because the load order matters. If you have library code that's being referenced, it always has to show up first in the plugin pool. So I don't want users to have to deal with that, which is why it ends up with the load string. But yeah, we will absolutely hit that one. That one is already on the list. Hello, Jeff. Hello, Art. Oh, good to see you can make it, Art. So as far as obfuscating it, I didn't used to. With the most recent plugins I've put out, I actually have started doing that. I have not done, I've seen, man, I wish I could tell you who it was, but I've seen somebody who does it all with escape characters, but it seems like that requires it to be a precompiled binary, and from what I've tested, that does not work the same on a console as it does on PC, which is why I have not gone that route. If I might be mistaken on that, I'm sure some people have figured out some stuff on that that I haven't. But yeah, the only amount of obfuscation I do now is removing all the line breaks in the comments, which I can actually show you guys what I've built for that. I've got a little program I made in C# for that. And it just makes it faster for me to put everything together. Okay, we're up to, I mean, I did not expect nearly as many people to show up for this as with MA stuff, so the fact that we're all the way up to 8 is kind of higher than I may have been planning for. Heck, let's just go ahead and get into this. Let me switch over. I have much less of a plan on this one as I do on a lot of my other streams, just because I figured this might be a little more specific request. So I'm just going to kind of get into it, and as questions come up, I'll address them. So let me see here. We got one more request up there. Joao, and if I'm butchering that, I do apologize. I'm not entirely sure what you're asking. If you could maybe add more detail, I apologize there. Okay, so while that's going through, let's go ahead and get started. So again, I just kind of wanted to start out just going through just some of the various things I do when I'm programming a plugin, things that a lot of which I've kind of learned the hard way, or that I've just have kind of been a system that's developed for me over time, and just kind of share what I have figured out and found for anybody else trying to get into this kind of thing. I am by no means any definitive reference for Lua programming. There are plenty of people who know much more about programming in general than I do. I don't want to come across as like acting like an expert on everything. Again, I just want to share like the bits that I do know for what it can help for other people. So I'm just going to hop over to this screen for now. And what I've got pulled up to start with is the template file that I use to start all my plugins from. Some of these could be a little bit updated, but so this is basically kind of the, it's referred to in some places as boilerplate code. So just my starting code with elements that I'm either always or pretty commonly going to have in a plugin, kind of start from here and then move on from that point. So I wanted to start from there. There's some coding concepts in general that I wanted to go through. Object-oriented programming in general is a really big one that has been very helpful to me to writing more complex plugins, and just some of the little things that, well, first off, some of the things you can do with that, making, oh, what are they called? Yeah, words are escaping me. Data objects, things that contain a certain kind of information that you can manipulate it in ways that you would need to commonly, and just kind of going through how to make a couple of those, moving on into some things about just Lua in general. In particular, I've hit some issues with kind of the way that Lua handles numbers and issues that you can run into when you're making commands out of those numbers. Yeah, there's a pile of things. I'm not going to bother detailing all of it now. We'll go through as questions come up, we'll address them. So this is my template code. I've got, just to take it top to bottom to start with and then get into like what the most important parts of it are. So I've just kind of got some info at the top. I've got a user config table that I put at the very top so that any user config variables can just start with that. It would be like, so it's clear to users as they come into it that this is part of user configuration. below the "do not edit below this point" comment. And I'm going to explain kind of why some of these things are getting colored the way they are. I've got some extensions running that have been super helpful recently. I'm going to skip over the debug file stuff. For more complex plugins, I'll have a text file generated that's kind of tracking all of the steps of the plugin. So if there's a crash that I'm having trouble pinpointing, I can figure out at exactly what step of a certain loop maybe that happened. I'll explain that way later. We hit our library code over here, as Michael was asking about. And by default, I actually reference this as a table. So we haven't had anything declared in this file so far that goes by this. And what I've got going on is that if I go to, let's see. So I've got a whole separate file of library code. And in this code, everything is just built into one big old table. If I can find some spots, it's just this _m table. And I don't actually know where I got that convention from. It seemed to be a common convention for writing Lua libraries. So anyways, I've got a whole bunch of code that's kind of, as I've, over time, just writing from one plugin to the next, found things that I'm reusing. I keep throwing them into this library so that I have quick access to them. And then at the very end, I will make a global variable equal that table. So then from my main plugin, I can reference that table. So all of that code that was thrown into that, and I'm going to get into the details of how this works later, but just so as we're going through, we're aware, that table is referenced by this global variable, and now everything that was in that table can be referenced in here by the start of GDF, which just stands for Giaffo Designs Functions, because that seemed like a thing to name it at the time. And then I've kind of broken out the subtables from there with local variables, so that I have quick access to them. For example, GUI.print comes from the GUI table, which comes from that GDF library, which lives in this 5,500 line plugin. So moving down the list, so these are all just declaring just quick access to some of those things. So I'm not typing GDF.get. Whatever, kind of just let me type less as I'm going along. I'm actually going to skip some of this stuff for now and come back to it. The main thing for anybody who may be a little bit newer to MA plugins, for your plugin to work, for you to be able to click on your plugin and to do something, you have to return functions to MA. And you don't return them as a function call, like that would be telling main to run. You just pass the function itself to MA. And what this does is basically when you click on it, it will run these functions in order. And it doesn't matter if the previous one completes or not. If this one crashes in the middle, it will still move on to the next function provided. And you can actually, to my knowledge, I know for sure on MA3 this is true, but you can have more than 2 functions. I've never personally had a need to do more than 2 functions, but I know it is possible to just keep adding commas and adding more functions, at least on MA3. I imagine on MA2 as well. Speaking of MA2, I guess I could go ahead and like have a window open here. But anyways, so your main and your cleanup functions, these are going to kind of be like the main components of any plugin you're going to write. The main function being what the name implies, and you can name them whatever. This has just been the convention I've seen. Main is going to be the body of your code. It's going to be what's actually executing things, doing the things you need it to do. Cleanup is here for me just to make sure that anything that happened in main that needs to be addressed is addressed, especially for if the plugin crashes. So like no matter how well you write your plugin, whether during testing or when you send it out for other people to use, it will crash at some point. There's just no way to account for every possible thing that could come up with it. When it does, you want to make sure that you don't have anything that makes it basically impossible to use the desk, or that you've left any mess behind that the plugin was supposed to take care of later that wasn't taken care of. And toward that aim, I have a few things in place. So that takes me back to some of these things we saw come up earlier, specifically these collection objects. I'm going to go into kind of what each of them contain. Actually, I think I'm going to do that now. So I've got a table for a bunch of different things. This st new, it's something I built into GDF. It stands for super table. It seemed like a worthwhile name once upon a time. It just kind of feels silly now, but I still use it. It's just it's a table object that has a couple extra methods added to it, which I can get into later, but there's really nothing that special about it. Really, it's just an append function. So you can just type colon and then append, and you can add something to it. I didn't know about table insert at the time, which is another thing I can totally hit on. Anyways, bringing it back. So the collection objects are declared outside of your main function so that as you are building your plugin, you can add things to them. And if your plugin, or really whenever this function ends, whether on purpose or not, the cleanup function still has access to everything that was in these because it was declared outside of this. If I was to take all these and declare them in here, they only live as long as this function lives. As soon as this ends, nothing outside of it has access to it, which means cleanup can't access anything in it. So just to go down the list of them, the first one is a list of progress bar objects, and I'm going to explain how that's built and actually go through the process of building one later. And this is, as the name implies, a table to hold all of my progress bars. Specifically because if you stop working, you have to call a progress bar stop function when it is running. And if you don't, while the plugin's running, you have zero possibility of ever reaching that progress bar again. And to explain, to show what that means, let me open up here. Let me switch to single screen mode as well. Options, nope. Just make it a little easier to look at this on our stream. We're gonna get there. We are gonna get there. There it goes. All right, cool. So progress bars. Let me maybe open up a different, so this is someone else's show file. Oops. Let's see. Probably doesn't help that I never use this version. Okay, well this one has a plugin thing, so let's do this. All right, so I'm gonna take my GDF code, and again, it is my library code, which I'll explain later, is currently set up to be read from a separate plugin. So I'm gonna drop that in here. All right. We'll worry about all that later. Okay, so my start template. So I'm just going to, for the time being, zoom out a bit so I can read a bit better here. I am going to completely comment out this cleanup function. So now cleanup won't run at all. And just, I don't need any of this right now either. So just to demonstrate what happens when you have a progress bar that doesn't get closed, let's say, and I'm not going to do anything else with this after I make it. So I'm never going to close it. I'm never going to get rid of it. And if we start this guy, where's MA? If I just run this guy, oh, well then, is it because, there it is. Yeah, I forgot, full screen makes the progress bars disappear. So we can see now I've opened up 5 separate progress bars and none of them have closed. And it doesn't matter because the plugin has already stopped running. So if I say off this, if I say off, everything off, these progress bars don't go away. And there is no way to get rid of, like, even if I change show files, like I can grab this guy, and these progress bars are still here. The only way to get rid of these now is to completely close MA, which is what we're going to do now. So things like that are the kinds of things that you definitely don't want to have happening just because a plugin crashed. Like obviously the plugin crashing is not a good thing, but you don't want it to make the show file unusable. So I think it's self-explanatory why that would be a bad thing. Stand by for just a second. Gotta fix something over here. All right. Now, lost my thought. So I'm going to open that show file back up. So anyways, that is why all of those live in there. So one of the things that I do is, first off, the plugin is always checking when it runs the cleanup function to see if the plugin actually completed successfully, because there are going to be certain things that I want to happen if the plugin was successful, and certain things I'm going to want to, oh, let me rephrase that. There are certain things I'm going to want to happen only when the plugin crashed, and other things that I will want maybe to happen every time the plugin ends. For example, progress bars. Every time the plugin ends, and now I've got to scroll this whole thing to uncomment it. Anytime the plugin ends, I am going to want to reset all of my collection items. So those will always be set to new tables at the very end of my cleanup function. However, there's deleting all of my progress bars. Wow. Oof. All right, give me a second here. Clean up my thoughts. Let me go through what all these things are. Then some of these will make more sense. So cleanup command. This is a array of commands that will execute at the end of the plugin no matter what happens. Whether the plugin crashes or doesn't crash, these will always run. Failure command is a similar concept, but these commands will only be run if the plugin is crashed. So I put a table in here, basically. Let's say that I'm in MA and I've navigated to, let's see. So let's say I do, I've entered the patch, for example. So I'm in the patch, I'm doing whatever I'm doing, and for some reason, something I put in there crashes the plugin. I don't want the user to get stuck in the patch menu just because the plugin crashed there. So if I'm working in the patch for something, the first thing I'll do is add to the failure command list to do cd/, which will take you back to the root directory, so that at least they're back in the normal environment. Because I'm sure a lot of people don't know, much about like actually navigating this folder system in the command line. So I don't want to be sending out a plugin to people who don't know anything about this, and all of a sudden they're stuck with this weird yellow text here and they don't know what the hell's going on. So that's the kind of thing I want to make sure can never accidentally just get stuck in the command line. So again, failure command is just it's a big list of commands that are only going to run if the plugin crashes. Let's see here. Debug log. This is the big text file that I'll open only on some of my plugins, and this is just for me to take really detailed, a detailed log of what the plugin is doing, so that I can see specifically when something didn't start up or didn't execute right. And then install log. This is the same concept as this, except this is just a table. And at the end of executing, this will just print to the system monitor. This is an earlier version that I used, and if I'm writing a plugin that doesn't need to have a whole lot of information tracked, this is the way I'll go. However, let me give you an example of kind of the differences between those two. So if I go into MA, 3.7 got used a lot. Let's see reports here. Yeah. All right. So here's one for the position effects thing I was setting up. So, oh, that one's actually not super detailed. Here we go. Preset effects extractor. That one crashed super fast. There we go. So something like this, where I need to check like every possible step that happened, like in some big loop or something, to see what kind of information might have gone into something at any given point in the plugin. So with this much information, this is actually still a really small printout of it. I wish I had a bigger one somewhere. Oh well, I don't want to kill too much time trying to find one. Maybe. Here we go. There. This is more accurate to the kind of logging I'm looking for. So like checking for space for new sequences, checking for, what else do we have going on in here? Copying sequences, checking every possible step that things happened at, letting me know that an operation completed correctly. When I need this much detail, I want it to go out to a text file, and we can see here that it crashed in the middle of writing to the file. So this is the kind of thing I'll use a text file for. But if it's just something like trying to keep track of like 5 to 10 pieces of information that I just want to see at the end of the plugin running, that is just going to go into, too many things open here. It's just going to go into install log, and it's just going to print to system monitor over here. So those are the 5 like main things that I'll keep for collecting any kind of information or objects that I'll be using in the course of making the plugin run. In my cleanup function, first thing I do every time is just go through all of the progress bar objects and run their stop method, and I'll explain the details of that, but I mean it does exactly what it sounds like it does. Close the debug file if I'm using one of the big text files. Make sure that if it is running, that it closes and it copies to all my any possible drives. Let's see, and then here's the code for anything that happens if the plugin didn't complete. So before the plugin runs, there's this plugin complete variable, and at the very end, I don't use this EOF thing anymore. At the very end, it gets set to true, which means that if it has to exit at any point before it reaches the very last line, this is going to still be false, which means that when we get down here, this will not evaluate to true unless it made it to the very last line. So if not plugin complete, so if it is still set to false, then we run all of this code. This error log thing is, it's not really worth getting into. It was an experimental thing that I don't think was worth it. But anyways, it was a different system for logging what specific error happened. Mostly it'll just give you a message box and it says the plugin failed, see the system monitor for details, so that you can see wherever the plugin had issues at. And then it will proceed on to executing anything in that failure command table. So it uses for IV and I pairs, which is just iterating through every element in a numerically indexed table. It's just going to go through and just execute all of those. And then after I probably could have organized this better. Again, I don't necessarily have this all organized the best, but like I'm editing my cleanup function so rarely that it really doesn't matter a whole lot what it's doing, because I know it's going to do what I need it to do pretty much always. So cleanup command is just going to run up anything that was supposed to run at the very end of the plugin, whether or not the plugin failed. It prints everything to the system monitor and command line. So gma.echo prints to the system monitor, gma.feedback prints to the command line. It'll just go ahead and print everything that happened there that I thought was important to put in here. And then we reset our tables. So we can ignore the error log, not worth paying attention to. What is important to note is that it creates new tables that are assigned to all of these existing variables. So this is a topic worth getting into for those who are maybe newer into Lua. Tables are not the same as let's say a number or a string, in that they are what is called reference variables rather than value variables. So the difference between these two, for example, if I was to say new failure equals failure command, these two will reference the exact same table. What these things actually store is a memory address that contains a table, which means that now that I've set, well, I guess it would be more appropriate to do this as local. Now that I've set this as a reference to an existing table, if I make any changes to this table changes as well, because they are the same table. They're just referencing the same thing. Versus if I was to say, let's see, num equals 1, num equals. Now if I was to say new num equals 3, the original num variable would not change, because these variables actually store their value directly. When I said this equals this, what I was telling Lua is that this is a new variable that gets the value that is currently stored in this. Or I could have done math here and done this like +1 or whatever. Which is not, again, this is not the same as when you're dealing with tables. They all work as reference variables. You're always referencing a memory address, which means to make one table or make a variable equal an existing table means you're just making a new name for it. You're making an alias for it. That becomes important when you are dealing with tables like this, because if I was to not do this, let me show what would happen there. So I'm going to say install append. Okay, so I'm just going to have it store that. So I'm going to copy all this and save it here. Back up. All right, so I'm going to run it, and we see that it prints when it's done running. I could have made that bigger, I'm sorry. When it's done running, it says the plugin has run. I'm going to print it again, run it again. Well, we see this time it ran twice. It gave us the plugin has run 2 times. If I run it again, we see that it's run 3 times. Because what is happening is that this table never stops existing. When the plugin ends, anything that was declared before these functions ran still exists. When you load up a plugin, any code that does not live inside of a function that's, I shouldn't say inside a function being returned, any code that's not living inside of a function is going to be run. So as soon as this plugin is saved, if I had stored, like this table already exists, all of this stuff exists. This is code that has run before it got to returning these functions to MA to be used, which means that these tables existed before the plugin ran. They just didn't have anything. It also means that when this function is done executing, it's not like it resets the Lua engine. It just finishes executing this function, but everything that existed before, unless it was deleted somehow by this, still exists, which means that when we keep running this function with an existing table, that table continues to exist, and we just keep adding on to things that are still persisting in memory. So to handle that, that is where this code at the end of cleanup comes in, where I take those existing variable names, and notice I'm not saying local because I don't want this to be a new variable that just lives within cleanup. By me not calling local on it, first thing it's going to do, it's going to look for the closest variable as far as scope goes. So first it's going to see if there's a variable within cleanup that is named this. If that fails, it's going to look the next level outside of cleanup, which in this case is our global scope. Actually, it's not global. It is still within this plugin scope because it was declared as local here. And we'll get into local and global in a little bit here. I feel like that's a good thing to bring up. All right. Sorry, I know this whole thing's a little bit ranty, but yeah. I guess I could be naming what we're doing here. I put this stupid little banner strip on here. I'm not using it. Sure. All right. So basically it is going to look if there is some existing variable with this name, and if there is, it is going to now assign a new table to it. So we've kept the same variable name, but we've just given it a brand new table to reference. So now when it runs again, so I'm going to save it again now that we have uncommented this. That took more effort than it should have. Come on. And now every time I run it, we're going to see that that line only shows up once, because every time we finish, it is creating a brand new empty table to assign to that variable, so we don't keep reusing stuff from before. Okay, I'm going to look at our comments real quick. Bit off topic, I think. Create one's little routine that erases all progress bars. Oh, okay. Okay, so I don't know how much of this is making sense so far. Don't actually know what's even going on in our stream so far, because this is super professional, just checking in on the stream in the stream. All right, so here is that. I think that pretty much covers kind of the main scope. So just to kind of recap the overarching structures I've got in place. There's a main function, there's a cleanup function. There's a variable that checks if the main function actually properly completed. If it did, then anything that is specific to the plugin failing does not get run. If it didn't, then it does get run. Cleanup function takes care of anything that is either supposed to be shared access. So these tables, when I say shared access, is supposed to be accessed by the main and the cleanup function. It handles anything that needs to be reset here, specifically table values, as well as it'll go ahead and reset my plugin complete value to false. And actually, I will come back to explaining that. And yeah, it just handles everything that I want to be reset in between plugin runs, or that I need to be handled if the plugin crashed. As far as that plugin complete equals false, if it is not obvious why that is happening, once the plugin completes successfully, this is going to be set to true. If I don't restart the plugin engine, there is no other code that is going to set this to false, because this code only runs when the plugin has loaded. It's not inside any function. It is just read down the list when you load this thing up, which means this stays as true when the plugin ends, unless I change it in cleanup. So the last step of cleanup is always to make sure that the plugin complete variable is set to false, so that on the next run, it is not accidentally perceived as having completed correctly, even if it crashed. That is definitely one of those things that I had to learn the hard way, because I couldn't figure out why the plugin was crashing and not acting like it was crashing. Yeah. I think that pretty much covers the main structure there. So let me get into some of my the little functions that I include here. So MA has a printing function, a couple of them. It has an echo and it has a feedback. There's also the gma.command function, which is how you execute something to the command line. Now, the way I've set mine up might be a little bit weird to some people. I'm using these ellipses in here, and what this means is that I can provide as many arguments to this function as I want to. The advantage to that is for using something like string.format, which can take an indeterminate number of arguments. Now, for anybody unfamiliar with string.format, I know I saved it somewhere, but to be honest, I could not tell you with accuracy where I did. So I'm actually just gonna check the internet real quick, and we're gonna post this up. Let's see. Print. So string.format is a way to format things into a string. Basically, take a bunch of values, add them into a predefined string using formatting that you specify. Let me see if I can find printf C options. It's based off of a function called printf from the C programming language. If I can find the correct one, and by correct I mean the one that I'm familiar with. I don't think, oh, okay, C++ reference, same thing. I'm gonna add this into the chat for anybody interested. And this has almost all the same options. The Luau reference book doesn't actually cover how to use print.format or string.format, which has been a little bit annoying to me. I'm not going to go into too much detail right now. It's definitely something that requires a lot of experimentation with to get a grasp on. But it allows you to put all these identifiers, and you can get really detailed with it. But basically, it allows you to put placeholders in a string that you can then substitute values into. So let me pull up an actual plugin of mine to show you what the hell that even means. So let's go into, what would be a good one? Where's our preset grid? Maybe this one's got something in it. Actually, you know what? Flash function, there we go. All right, so let's see if we have, okay, something like this. So this would be a formatting string. Oh, actually, let me, good Lord, that's actually pretty complicated to read. For God's sake. Okay, so for example, right here, I can just provide string.format. I know this isn't, oh, sorry, it is actually using it. So you give it a string, and then you give it these escape characters. For anybody who's familiar with any of the other string functions, string.match, string.gsub, these are pattern functions that you can provide to it. They're a little bit different than when you're searching for text, but I can give it this, and then I give it a string as my first argument, and it's just gonna substitute this %s with the actual name. I am not doing the best job explaining that one. You can see that I kind of use it all over the place. So here's a more detailed example. So I am trying to give some kind of a string before a line break, then ID, then some other string, then another line break, then install name, and then some other string. So one way that I could have written this, I'm just going to one way that I could have written this was to have said, instead of all, oh hell, return, and then we would have said self to string, which we'll get into the self keyword later. Dot dot. So the dot dot is a string concatenation. It's how you put two strings together. Then a line break, then ID, then it would have been come on, and then it would have been this ID string, and then we would have had another dot dot here, and then at the very end we would have concatenated on self.installName. So I just personally find that a hell of a lot harder to work with, and it takes up so much extra space to deal with, versus when we undo all of that. Totally could have copied something instead. All right, versus when I can just see that it's going to be something on one line, then ID something on the next line, then install name something on the line after that, and then I can just provide my arguments in a list here. I just find that a lot easier to work with, especially when working with commands. So if I look for command, not a good example there. Come on, somewhere down this list we've got some. Okay, so for example, I'm gonna say label some number, some string. And that's just a lot easier to work with in the way that you're gonna be thinking when you're writing out a command. Usually you would be labeling some type of something, like you'd usually be saying like label group something, something else. Because I'm working in the patch the way that it works there, I don't need to give a name for a type of anything. I just label a number, some name. And here I can just say I'm gonna label that number, this name. And I know that I don't have to worry about crap, did I remember to put a quote in there? Because if anybody's ever tried to build commands like this using concatenation, using the dot dot operator, it becomes a very hectic mess trying to keep track of, what is that? Oh, I thought that was a VS Code thing. Sorry, I'm a fucking squirrel. Let's look at an old ass plugin. Oh man. Oh, I don't have my old plugins in here, do I? This one can't be super clean, I imagine. Yeah, I guess this one doesn't have super complex things, but like, for example, trying to write a command like this, DMX, some kind of universe, then we add in a dot. Like, just looking at these 5 dots in a row is already kind of a pain. Plus the dots in between the separators. Like, there's just so many goddamn dots in between the things here that it's obnoxious to look at. Whereas now I would write this like, first off, I would not be doing shit like this because, I mean, I might. I don't know. I don't think I would. It's hard to say without reading through the script. I just think this is a little bit confusing to look at, but I would say on set loop equals string dot format DMX, good lord, some universe dot some channel at some value. We're going to make an assumption that that value, no, that's definitely going to be a float. Okay. And we're going to get into the difference between so D stands for, to be honest, I don't know what the fuck it stands for, because it's specifically a non-decimal number, so I don't know how it ended up with D. You know what? I want to know now. Okay, it's considered decimal because it's base 10, I guess, versus X, which would be hexadecimal. Anyways, so this is an integer number versus a floating point or a number with a decimal in it. I kind of hate that terminology right now. And then I could provide my arguments to get back to the point. v.universe, v.channel, and v.value. And I just feel like that is so much easier to look at and understand if you're typing out your command correctly than trying to do this. This is just messy to me. So I've really been appreciating string.format, and one of the things that I really appreciate it for is handling my numbers. So this is a topic that I have really wanted to get to because when you are okay. So when you're collecting input for numbers, anytime you use GUI.input, TypeScript template literals, extreme tech. If I actually, could you explain TypeScript template literals? Because I am actually not familiar with that. So one of the things I really love string.format for is that it forces, in particular when you're working with numbers, it forces your numbers into a very specific formatting. So for an example, let's say num1 equals, you know what, I'm going to open this up in my Lua interpreter because I just don't want to be, this is generic Lua information, so I don't see a point in opening it in MA at the current moment. I think that's readable. I can't make it any bigger. So I hope that is readable enough. If it is not, please leave me comments and I will switch over. So let's say local number 1. Actually, just to check readability, I'm just going to run this real quick to see if I can make this any bigger. Yes, I can. Excellent. Just want to make sure everybody can see what's going on down here. Okay. So let's say, oh, I don't know, equals 0.9, and then we're going to say number 1 equals number 1 plus 0.1. And I'm going to run this again. So right now it is going to, it is showing up just as 1. The Lua interpreter on here may be working a little bit differently. Oftentimes what I have run into is that once you take something into decimal territory, Lua handles some stuff in the background for you that other programming languages don't. So in Lua, you only have one number type, and it's called number. If you work with a language like C#, any of the C variants, I'm not sure if Python has it, but there's a lot of languages where you have to declare what kind of number you're working with. Any of the C types, there's multiple types of integers, multiple types of floats that you can use. That they actually have quite a few different number types. The differences between, like, an integer is an integer. It is a whole number, somewhere in a, depending on the bit depth you go, I don't want to get into too much detail, it's a whole number. Whereas a float is how a computer handles decimal numbers. Lua does use both, but it handles the conversion in the background. And actually, it may be worth me testing this out here. Now I'm going to say echo num1. Oh, all of my windows here. Okay. So if I run this, we see that it prints out 1.0. Whereas if I comment this out and I say I say that equals 1. I'm going to copy that now. and we see that it just prints 1. So generally speaking, this shouldn't be a big deal, right? Like if I'm just dealing with a 1.0 or a 1, if I'm counting something, if I'm trying to get an idea of a quantity of something, it doesn't make any difference. Oh, a 1 is a 1 is a 1. It's just written out a different way, which is great, except sometimes when you get user input always comes in as a string, and you have to convert it to a number. I don't fully know, and it's been a long time since I've played around with it. I don't fully know how to. I know what it is. I know what it is. It is, let's say, I might not know what it is, but I think I know what it is. To number. Actually, it might just be num1 plus 1. I'm going to try this. So this is a string. This shouldn't work by default, but this could be one of those things that Lua tries to handle for you to make your life easier, and it does. That's where it comes in. Okay, so I declared this number as a string, and when you get it back from GUI.input, or MA, there's a whole library of things, which I should show you guys in a minute. When you try to perform math on a string, the first thing it tries to do is see, can I convert this to a number? And if it can, it does, but it seems that it always by default converts it to a float. Well, why does that matter? Because if this was macro number, and we're going to say this is macro, oh, let's say 5, and my command is, let's say, store macro 1 dot, because you have to have a 1 dot for if you're trying to edit a line, 1 dot, and then we're going to add in macro num dot 4, let's say, but we're going to say, so I'm going to increment this, and this is to demonstrate what would be happening in a loop. If I'm going in a loop through a bunch of macros, then I would be incrementing this number. Now let's say it came in as a string. Let's pretend this is a step of a loop, and we are going to store something to that macro line. I don't know if anybody sees where this is going yet, but so we're just going to echo what that command would look like. And if I run this, the problem we've now run into is that instead of it being store macro 1.6.4, we got macro 1.6.0.4, which completely changes how the command works and will not run the way that you were hoping it was going to run, which is another step where string.format comes in. If I was to say echo, and I'm just going to redo this. My echo function, sorry, we had started talking about this earlier, is set up to receive a variable number of arguments, because if it sees that the first thing in there is a string, then it will go ahead and implement string.format on it, just so I don't have to type that in every time, because it is such a common thing that I'm going to be using with echoes and with commands. So, oh, sorry. Hello, Zach. Oh, you got, oh, that was, okay, I'll read that in a minute. Sorry, I'm getting squirrel brained. Okay, so I'm going to redo this as a string.format thing. So I would say store macro 1 dot my macro number dot 4 in this case, and then my argument to it would be macro number. Now, specifically because this percentage sign D tag means that it's going to be an integer, even if it's reading as a float in Lua's memory, string.format forces it to be pushed down to a normal number formatting. And if for some reason you just need to make sure that you've converted your number into a integer format, because Lua doesn't give you any option to say to integer, to float, because it's handling all that in the background for you. One way that you can handle that is to say macro number, let's say in this case, equals string.format. So we're going to provide our original number as an argument to string.format, so it turns it into a string that has no decimal, and then I'm going to say to number, all of that. So it takes it back to a number. And the explicit to number conversion will try to make it an integer first, but not the implicit one when you just try to perform math on a string. I'm hoping that makes sense. So, okay. So I'm just looking at the comments now, and what Extreme Tech has posted here, this is the same way that you would put in variable names in a language like C++ or JavaScript. Where was his earlier comment? Extreme Tech, does that's not like a built-in function in Lua, is it? Because I have not seen it anywhere, if it is. But yeah, what he's put in there, that is the exact syntax you would use for something like, actually that ticker sign is specifically what you would do in JavaScript. Which, now that I'm seeing TypeScript, he might have been talking about JavaScript specifically. Okay, it doesn't apply to Lua. I was about to say, damn it, I'm feeling like a dumbass if I didn't know about that. Okay. So, anyways, that's one way that you can handle some of this stuff. Also, if you are working with decimal numbers, for example, you're doing math, you're trying to set, let's say, an attribute to a certain value. This is something I've been working with for a separate project recently. But let's say I want to say command attribute, I think it's, oh, for Jesus, okay. So I want to say set red at, and I want to give it a value. And let's just say, I'm going to finish that in a second. Local value is, I don't know, 51 point. Let's say it was determined through a whole bunch of math. So like, well, we can't have 2 decimals in there, but let's say that's our value. So I'm going to give it a float. Again, floats are how, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on it, but it's how computers handle decimal numbers. And I'm going to say value. All right, I'm going to comment the rest of this crap out. And I'm going to run this guy. You know what? I'm going to actually have this just print to the system monitor because it keeps it all in one window for us. All right, and when I run this, so we see it's going to try to put it at a lot fewer decimals actually than I expected, but still kind of an annoying amount. You know what? Hell, let's try command, because I swear command does actually make it fucking obnoxious. Maybe the particular number I picked gets rounded off. Okay, it's rounding this particular one off. Whatever. But let's pretend we really needed this to be, like, let's say we're putting it in an XML file, we really wanted this to truncate at 3 decimals. Now you could convert this into a string and then like analyze, okay, after a decimal point, count this many spaces over and then get rid of everything else after that. It is a valid way to do it. It's just kind of a slower, more difficult way to do it, I guess. So one of the things you have available with string.format is specifying, for example, how many places after, so I can't talk and do things at the same time. Oh Lord, how many places after a decimal you want it to continue. So if I say 0.3f, now when I run this, I'm going to change this back to echo. Paste that there. Now when I run it, it's only going to go 3 decimals past, or 3 digits past the decimal point, and it will automatically handle rounding to if that is relevant. So that is a really, it makes it a lot easier to control how much of a number is going into something. And again, there are plenty of options on this thing. So like you can handle hexadecimal numbers automatically, whether in lower or uppercase, which is the 0 to F formatting that you'll see for colors, most commonly for colors that I run into at least. You can set it up in scientific notation. I mean, they've got examples here of what all of these things are. And some shit that I've definitely never used. Yeah, so anyways, to sum it up, it allows you to just really control the formatting of how things get put into a string without having to spend an excessive amount of time just working on string manipulation to make it look right. For me to print out a DMX address, for example, and this will become relevant in a little bit here, I could say local universe equals 4, local channel equals, I don't know, 14. And I could say echo DMX address is D dot, and I think I've got this right, but I'm going to try 3D. So this is going to specify the minimum number of digits that I can use. So if I give that universe and channel, what I should see is the address formatting we are all used to on MA. Nope, 0 3D. Okay, so what just happened here was I specified the minimum number of characters, but by default, and I could do this to a string too, this is just going to be empty space. This is a really good tool for if you're just printing out a big list of things and you want to make sure it's a consistent width. You can specify the minimum width of a certain chunk. Now I wanted those to be zeros, so, and I just happen to know that though, since I've used that before, that you just put a 0 before the 3 and that works. Again, that is all, I learned all of that from this one sheet, so it is a very helpful resource for me, and should be for you too. What'd I do wrong? God, bloody, did I forget to actually paste it in here? I thought I did it. There it is. Okay, I forgot to paste it. That's all. So that turns it into a 0 padded thing. So whether my number is currently two digits or 1 digit, it will always show up in the correct format. Or 3 digits. Obviously, there's no zeros to pad there. But that, like, for something like that, I used to go through a logic loop of like having it continually adding zeros to a string until it was the correct length, which again, it worked, but definitely was not the fastest way to do it. And especially considering when you do something like string.format, that is something that is built into the C code that runs Lua. And anything that is running in C, anything that was compiled, that was written in a compiled language, which Lua is an interpreted language. I can get into that in a minute here. But anything that's written in a compiled language, it's running machine code. It is running binary code, which is going to be exponentially faster than anything you can do in Lua, which means any functions that are set up there are going to be faster than some kind of a Lua loop, which means it will speed up your code. For something that is a literal 2-line piece of code, it doesn't matter. But when you start getting into really long, heavy loops, it will make a difference. Let's see here. Okay, just kind of looking at some comments. So, give me a second, my throat's starting to hurt here. If I was on the road, this is where I'd make some kind of a drug joke, but I figure everybody will take me way too seriously here. Okay, the hell was I talking about? Okay, so I had talked about, that was most of what I wanted to hit on as far as numbers go, and as far as using string.format. Again, string.format has really made a big difference as to just how much more readable I feel like my code is to look at and understand what I'm doing with a command, than having like 14 concatenation operators back to back and trying to understand what the hell I'm doing. So I'm just looking through my notes here for a second. So yeah, the other, like, one of the other really big things for me, you know what, let me hit functions real quick first and then get into object programming, because that gets really detailed. Reading a comment here, you implemented parsing variables in the plugin call. Michael, I have not. So I think I've seen, what is it, the awesome position generator? I want to say that whoever programs that, and I feel bad that I can't remember because I know it's somebody that I know. I can't remember whose plugin that is, but I think he has set his up to handle that, and I briefly tried it, but then I just kind of gave up on it because I couldn't figure it out, and I guess I just didn't care enough at the time. Not that it can't be useful, it would absolutely be useful. Just for anything like that, I've changed to passing tables to an argument instead from a macro. So I just haven't had an explicit need to switch away from that system. So the short answer to your question is no, I do not know how to pass variables in a plugin call. I know it's possible. I don't know how anybody figured it out. I guess they just kind of took a swing at it, since that's how you do it on command line programs. But yeah, I don't actually know. But it is possible. If you get that plugin, I know that they had some system where like you type in a letter or something and it'll generate the position. I want to say it was that one, but I think they have macros built for it too. You might be able to just analyze the macros that were built. And again, it might just be somebody else's plugin entirely, and I might be referencing the wrong thing here. So let's get into documenting our code, since I'm remembering to actually bother with this stupid thing. All right, I'm not much of a streamer, so I don't have a huge idea what the fuck I'm doing with the stream window. It's kind of a first attempt at adding these things in. Saw Zach Bosserman doing it a couple weeks ago and figured I'd give it a shot. Okay, functions, documenting your fucking code. This is a thing that I wish I could say I've been better at myself. I have not. In more recent code I've been doing, I've had a much better. I've been a lot better lately at actually documenting what I'm doing with code. But I've got a lot of old code in my library stuff, especially, that I look at it and I'm like, I'll have to stop for a few minutes and like either rewrite the code or just spend some time reading it down, trying to figure out what the hell I should be expecting it to spit back out at me, because I didn't take proper notes on it when I was doing it, and somehow it didn't occur to me that 4 years later I wouldn't remember what I was doing when I first wrote it. So let's look at this, for example. I think since this is a recent one, I would have recently, it's kind of redundant. So for example, here's a function that I have no notes on. I have no idea what it's actually going to bring back in. I did at least take the time to take notes on how to build this object, which I'll get into again in a bit, but I did not take notes on what it returns. Now here, this is the kind of thing that I think is super helpful to do with your code. When you're writing a function, first off, write what the input is supposed to be, and fully write what the input's supposed to be, because I clearly didn't finish that here. Oh God. Anyways, write what your expected input is. Oh, it was supposed to be maybe this. Okay, I was in the middle of changing it, and I guess I got distracted, as I do. Okay, so yeah, I could have titled this a little bit better, but the type of the argument expected, as well as like some brief description of it. Usually your variable name should be the description of it, so this should have actually been, which I guess I could see being a little more confusing. Maybe I would do like something like that. And then an optional variable of an argument table. An argument table for me is just I'll usually put this at the end. It's a way for me to name specific arguments. So most commonly it's like when I'm setting a flag for something. For example, get script, I want to set a flag for keep script. It's going to be a Boolean value, and that just means that if I set that to true, which that would look like get script, I don't know, preset 4.1, and then I could say keep script equals true. That allows me to just set this option to say, hey, when you do this, don't delete the XML file you create, because I need to check it, because something's going wrong. But I don't want to have like a list of like 15 different arguments here and then have to remember, well, how many times do I pass nil to this thing before it works? So like another way I could have written this declaration would have been, let me make sure I don't save anything on this. Okay, so I could have written this as script equals function. Let's see, object, then alternate location. we'll talk about naming conventions in a second here, because you can see I've got one naming convention here, a different one there, a debug stream, oops, and then keep script. So if I'm calling this thing, but I don't need to use an alternate location, so when you export something, the XML file will go to, most commonly, it will go to, can I make you bigger? You can't read that text. Can I do this? I'm gonna hope that I am switching to the correct screen. Sorry, we're gonna have a feedback loop for a second. Yeah, we're sending, okay. I could, so it could go to any one of a number of folders. Most commonly, it'll go to import export, but if you're exporting a macro, it'll go to macros. If you're exporting an effect, it'll go to effects. There are a couple of types of objects that have a specific folder. The rest of them just go to import export. So the whole purpose of that argument is just to tell it, does it go to one of those alternate folders? And if it does, what's the name of it? If I'm just exporting a preset, that goes to import export. So I would be calling get script, say preset 4.1, and then I would say nil because I don't have an alternate location. A debug stream, well, this is a short plugin, so I don't need a big debug stream, which is that object I was talking about earlier that writes a big ass text file. I don't need that, so I'm gonna give it another nil. And then, okay, now I do want to set it to true. Now, if I didn't need to set this to true either, I could have just called it, I could have just terminated it right there. But now I've got to set 2 nil arguments, which is saying nothing. It's a placeholder. And now I have to get all the way out to there by passing 2 nils. What if I've got something like, I know I've got some that use way more possible arguments. I don't want to have 15 different arguments here and try to keep track of which position I want to say put keep script in. So instead, I do it in this table format, and then in the argument, it just looks for if this value exists, then do that, which actually should exist right here. If not, args.keepScript, which args is the name that I gave to that table that gets passed in as the second argument. If that doesn't exist, if that doesn't exist, go ahead and delete the file. Otherwise, keep it. And that just makes it a lot easier than trying to, again, it doesn't change my code down here much, I guess. It changes how I call it and just makes it a lot easier to read, especially because I'm having to call it by its name. So when I see this in my code somewhere, I know specifically what this true is for. Versus if I'm looking at this, nil nil true, well, that's fucking helpful. Like, okay, I ignored 2 arguments and I called the third one. Let me go check what that function did to understand what was going on. It's just a really pain in the ass way to work as you get into variables that you will only occasionally call. So again, that's how I handle this. I sure as fuck don't want to use that. I just find it to be a lot cleaner to work with. Okay, so again, all of that to say, documenting your code is super helpful. So like I will document the life out now. More recently, I will document the life out of what's supposed to go into a function, what's supposed to come out of it, and how all the pieces in between, or anything relevant to how it works, is going to work. So this one, it tells me my normal output is just going to be an XML script, so I know I'm expecting a string. And if I get an error, I know I'm expecting nil and then an error message. So if I'm going to call this and I'm saving the script to a variable, I want to try to catch an error message too, so that I know if something showed up in this second return value, that a problem happened. And this is a scheme that you'll see in a lot of other people's Lua libraries, is if there's an issue, and actually some of the built-in Lua libraries for that matter, if there's an error, you'll get nil followed by an error message to find out what went wrong. And it'll allow you to continue. It will allow you to continue if you so choose and make the decision whether or not you want to terminate the plugin because of it, but it won't force the plugin to crash at that moment. Collect garbage. Huh. Interesting. I don't know what the hell I was doing with this thing. All right, so that covers that part of it. I did mention naming conventions. There are no official naming conventions for Lua. I think I've looked this up, and you know what? Before I talk out of my ass, let me Google that. but I want to say that I've looked this up and that there wasn't a style guide. Uh-oh, here's a style guide. Indenting, naming. Okay, so this does kind of use a little bit of, well, shit, I haven't looked too much into this. If there is an official naming convention, I would encourage using it. I seem to remember it just not being as specific as some others. So in this last year, I started working a lot more with C#, more recently JavaScript, a tiny amount of C++. And one of the things that was a common thing to run to, especially with C#, writing in Visual Studio, the full program, it will even call you out if you're not using the right naming conventions. It gets very picky on you. And I got a lot more in the habit of naming certain things off of certain conventions. So for example, just naming a variable, I will use camel case, which is where the first word in the name is lowercase and everything after that is capitalized. So it would look like, oh, I don't know, if I was saying local color preset value, that would be misspelled. That's camel case. Every word except for the first one, it has an uppercase. There is also, I forget if this, did this give me a name? I know there is a name for it, but when you're using underscores, snake casing, that's what it's called. So I can say, that is snake casing. This seems to be a lot more popular. This actually seems to be a fairly common Lua thing, because it seems to be a pretty common C and C++ thing. The really important thing about these is stick to one. Pick one, stick to it. It is really confusing when your code has some of this and some of this. And by your code, I mean my code, because I have done a lot of just mixing this shit up, trying to figure out, oh, this one seems appropriate now, but oh, well, maybe this one seems more appropriate now. I will have rare occasions where I will combine the two if there is something very particular I'm doing. And again, my own code usually isn't getting, I'm not working on it with other people. What's important is just to be able to set it up to where you're not confused by which naming convention you may have used at a given point. I forget what this one's called. There's a separate name for this one, but when you capitalize the first letter of every word, this is used for, I genuinely don't know the name of this one. Fuck it. But this is something you would do more for a class name. So if you have a class which is basically a template for an object, which we'll get into right after this. Oh, I should keep up with these. Sure. Oh, where'd I go? I lost it. Okay. This is something you'd use for a class name so that you know that this isn't an object. This is something that you can make an object out of. And just having that separation of the way something is named based on what it does makes it a lot easier to look at your code and go, oh, okay, this isn't an object. This is a class. This is something that will make me an object. And just by looking at that name, you already know what it does. I've had a little bit of complications in trying to do this with some of my own plugins, just when I've been trying to kind of create my own naming conventions. Kind of the takeaway of this is if you go work in another programming language where there is a more established set of naming conventions, it will be much easier for you to keep track of, for you to figure out what to do with naming things when you come back to working in Lua. I know MA3, the way they've set up their naming conventions, they're changed. It looks a lot more like C# code, which would make sense because I do believe on PC is written in C#. Okay, not talking and clicking at the same time. Let me find this. Source code for the preset grid generator. All right, let's look down this big old mess. And whoever was asking about my libraries, this is what it looks like when I embed the whole fucking thing in one big old script. And I need to get into how I do that. All the squirrely thoughts. Okay. So let me look down here a little bit and see if I did a vaguely decent job at this. So it looks like I changed up my main thing here, and I started by setting plugin complete to false, which is a much better idea. I don't know why I haven't been doing that more. Okay. Oh Lord. Sorry, give me a second. I'm just kind of analyzing my own code. This all uppercase snake case thing is something I started doing. This is how you name constants in like C++ code. I had a very brief fling with Arduino and had to use a little bit of this. It was kind of a convention I started picking up for the user config variables. One, so they'd be easier to read and make it just very prominent for users to go, oh, okay, I should look at these. But yeah, that convention was kind of just stolen from constants because they kind of work as constants. Once they're set up here, they're not being changed in the code. These are entirely for users to set and not to be modified during execution. Anyways, to get back to wherever the hell I was at. Let's see. No, I know I usually name my containers if I'm storing like all user inputs. I'll try to name those all the same way within a given plugin. I used to do those all uppercase. Now I think I capitalized the first letter. You can see this exec. So this is a container of executors. It's a single executor, but I named everything else plural. So, oh Lord, it's hard to just jump right into an old plugin. And again, some of my own older code is not the best example of some of these things. I'm sure if I met a real programmer, they would tear me a new one for some things. But I was at least consistent. So all of my containers for user inputs or for anything that was getting stored to, it was plural. That was one thing that used to throw me off. And that's why execs is execs instead of singular. Oh no, this would definitely be creating more than one. Never mind. But anyways, make sure they're all plural so I don't like mix between macros and then sequence singular because that gets confusing trying to figure out which object you're referencing. Making sure that all of them are starting with this uppercased first letter so that I know anytime I'm referencing a container like this during this script that I will be naming it like that. It also helps that like if I just start typing that in Visual Studio Code, it will give me the autocompletes. But again, for whatever else I was doing, I have both. I have the capitalized version, I have a full lowercase version, I have a full uppercase version for whatever was going on at a certain point. I don't even know if I want to dig through and find out why all those exist. I probably might end up just hating myself a little bit. There we go on that. Now, not fully certain what my endpoint was there. Except just keep your naming conventions readable and make sure you don't end up confusing yourself with them. Try to pick something and stick to it. So with that out of the way, I did want to get into the idea of object-oriented programming and why it is such a big deal with writing anything that might use something that would function as an object. So, what's an object? Let's go take a look at where is something that I would have used one on. Definitely not this old ass thing. Let's see. Page Flash, this one. Does this generate macros? Certainly it does. Class dot. So anything that is a class template, I store in a table called class within my GDF library so that I know exactly where to be looking for them. So here's an example of one. Command sequence. I have an object type built that will generate an empty sequence for me that is just running commands. So I can store different queues in it, I can store different queue parts in it, I can assign different commands to each of the queue parts, and I can work with that in a way that more or less makes sense, that makes sense to look at in code. In this particular one, it only gets one queue, it looks like, because I'm not writing any kind of a loop. But This allows me to basically say, okay, I'm going to create a sequence. It's going to be just for using commands. Here's the name of the sequence. Here is the number the sequence is going to be stored to. Here's the info that's going to be assigned to that sequence. And I can just do all of that in one command, initializing it basically as a table. And then within that, I can go ahead and create a new line, which would be a new queue. Give it a queue number. It's not exactly synonymous to a queue, but a queue part. Yeah, it's a queue part. Give it the queue name, the queue number, the command that's going to be associated with it, and then it has a write function where once I'm done doing things with it, it writes it into MA. So it'll build an XML script, which I can actually take a look at over here potentially. Let's see. Let's take a look at what this looks like. There it is, class.command sequence. So this is one table, and this is all of the stuff in it. So you can see it takes up quite a few lines. If I was smart, I wasn't. I did not list out. This is, again, another example of just not doing my documentation well. Let me check out my other class items, because hopefully some of these have more documentation to them. Let's see, here we go, class.debugstream. So this is, again, this is the thing that creates a big text file for me to document what's going on with the plugin. And what I've done with it is document everything that it does. I've listed out all of the methods that I can call on it, that will have it perform certain functions, any fields that are something that I would want to be accessing, and then what I've called private. This is a concept that comes from object-oriented languages, like any of the types of C. You technically can make things private, which just means they can only be accessed by certain things. It is a huge fucking pain in the ass on Lua, and just not worth the effort. And again, there's just not really a point with things you'd be writing in Lua. But anyways, just to explain why I have private and public there, those are concepts that come from other programming languages. So with that said, I have listed out everything that should be here. If I had been a little bit more, what's the word? Thorough, I would have listed what kind of variables these are. So this is a string, this is going to be a string, that's going to be a string. I guess since I can look at these and know, it didn't seem like as big of a deal, but it is definitely also a good idea to document what kind of value it's going to be, so that you know how to work with them. So like tab, I think that's a number, but I don't know. Indent level should be a number. Spacer, string, question mark. I shouldn't even bother filling it in. So anyways, when I create a new debug stream, I can take the variable that's created and I can call all of these things. So I can say debug stream write line, and then I pass it a string, and it will write that. And I think I've actually added string.format into this, but it will go ahead and write that with the current indentation level on the current file that's open to that open file. I can do write line I, which is write line indented. It adds an extra indent and goes ahead and writes whatever I provide to it. And what I'm doing is I'm containing all relevant information to the process of writing this debug file in one object, so that when I write code to it, it's intuitive to look at. I know the preset grid generator uses it to some degree, but it would be more useful to take a look at presets effects extractor, because this one, we started having some big issues with it crashing. Oh, wrong one. There we go. Okay, so let me look for write line. Come on, here we go. All right, so I'm taking my debug log and I keep calling this write line message. Write line, here's a sequence input that I received from the user. Anywhere that's highlighted in orange, you can see I'm calling it to write to this debug file, so I can keep track of every step of this plugin, especially as it is. So all of this is a loop. And in that loop, oh, no, that wasn't even the end of it. This was the end of the loop. So there's a lot that might be going on at any given step of this, and I need to know it with every possible element what happened to try to figure out, okay, well, when this thing does crash the console for some reason, what has happened so far that it could have led to that. And all of that is just contained in this dlog item. So I just say this right line, and this is keeping track of the open file, keeping track of whether or not it is currently open, keeping track of the number of indents to use for each line that is added, whether I use right line or I had a right line I somewhere. If I just want to add one extra indent for that particular line, that's all contained in one thing. The most obvious, the earliest example that I had to use this was progress bars. So if I were somewhere in here, I've opened too many things, too many tabs. Okay. All right, class.progressbar. So this is a class that I've written for handling progress bars. So for anybody who has not worked with progress bars before, when you create a progress bar, it returns a number to you. That number is a handle. That is how you refer to that progress bar for MA, so it knows how to do something with it. You don't get any kind of like an object back that tells you like the range that it holds or whatever. Like you have to kind of keep track independently of what the bottom value is, what the top value is that progress bar can extend to, the text on it, the handle number associated with it, and well, just to kind of look at some of the things that it will do. So if I create a new progress bar, let's see, there's got to be a handle value here somewhere, handle. So uses the built-in MA create a progress bar function, and then assigns that to a handle, and that lives inside of a table. That table becomes what we see as self as we go down this. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But anyways, I store that into a table that also contains the range, the top and bottom numbers that this progress bar can reach to, the current value of the progress bar, the current text value of the progress bar, and the name of it, which are two separate values for some reason, even though they're both just text that shows up on top of it. So with that, like there are a couple different things I wanted to be able to do with the progress bar. For example, I might want to just tell the progress bar increment by 1. I don't want to have to tell you the number. Maybe I don't want to be tracking the number. I want that to live inside of a progress bar item. So I just tell it set, and I will give it a value of 1. So this would be called as sorry, I know I'm kind of ranting. If I get confusing with any of this, first off, let me make sure that there are people I'm still talking to. Oh, okay, there's a few people. If anything gets confusing, if I'm going too fast or just rambling, like nobody be afraid to say I don't get it, because there's a greater than 0% chance that I am just doing a bad job at explaining it, because I'm kind of just rambling through ideas as they come to mind, as they seemed relevant to talk about. Anyways, so I would say something like, this would not happen inside the function, just so we're clear. Maybe this will make it less confusing. My progress bar is class.progressBar new. And what's my constructor? Just a name. And I'll explain what's going on with this as I type some sample code here. I don't know why I'm typing sample code here. I could do it with an actual freaking progress bar. Let's do that. Why aren't we doing that? Why are you guys letting me explain stuff terribly? All right. So we're going to say my progress, or actually, since we have a table for this specifically so they don't get stuck, let's say that table progress bars dot main, we'll just call it main progress bar, is a new progress bar. And I'm just going to end all these with a 2-second pause, just so we can see it do something. Oh, that's the wrong window. All right, so here's our progress bar plugin. Oh, and let me bother to update my text strip here. Sure, why not? Okay. So here's our progress bar plugin. So I'm going to run it. What'd I do wrong? Let's take a look. pbars.main equals. Oh, I didn't give it a name. Cool. I definitely want to go through this, whatever it is, extension, parentheses extension is really helpful. All right, so I run this, but since I'm in full screen mode, we don't see shit happen. All right, let's try this again. There, okay, progress bar shows up here. I don't know why this acts so weird when you like full screen a window, but it acts weird. Anyways, so there's our progress bar, great. It showed up, text might've been too small to read. If I switch screens here, let's try this. So make sure it's showing up. Yep, there's our feedback loop, cool. So if I run this here, we'll see it's a progress bar, cool. It made a progress bar and then it shut down. So now I am going to go in and let's make it do something. So let's say pbars.main, and let's say set range. I'm going to set it 0 to 10, and then for I, yeah, just do a for loop for I equals 1 to 10. Trying to make sure I don't write in the wrong language right now. We'll just say pbars set 1 true. I'm going to explain all of this in just a second, what all this is actually doing. Semicolons aren't actually necessary, but between JavaScript and C#, I've just gotten in the habit of it. Okay, so, and we'll give it a, and we'll make it pause for, I don't know, like half a second in between each of these. And I'm just going to kill this now. All right. So, and then once all this is done, because this lives in pbars, when cleanup gets called, the first thing it's going to do is call its stop method. I'm going to explain in just a minute the difference between a method and a function, which isn't a whole lot of one. So let's switch back over here, progress bar plugin. All right, so I'm going to run it. Oh, what did I do? Attempt to call a nil value set. All right, what is my actual method I'm supposed to call on that? It is set, but I called it as a value instead of a method. So for people who have not called methods on strings before or on anything, my mistake here is that I said pbars, oh, I really fucked that one up. So first off, it was supposed to be pbars.main, and then I'm supposed to set that. So let's talk about this colon for a second. This colon means that when you call this function, first off, it means that it lives inside of this. With a string, it's a little more complicated than that, but more or less you can think of it as living inside of the object calling it. It's more technically part of the meta table of the thing that calls it. Actually, even that's only half true. Anyways, so first off, it lives inside of this. Second off, the colon instead of a dot means that it is passing itself as the first argument. So when we looked at how I built all these, we see that these are all function of self and then something, function of self, then something else, function of self, something else, something else. When you call this function with a colon, it means that if it's being called from a table, that table will provide itself as the first argument, followed by whatever else comes up. So when I say this, what I'm actually doing, I'll run it as this first, just to demonstrate. So I'm going to paste this here. And we're going to run it, and we can see that we have our progress bar increment here, and then it finishes. Now I could type that out just the same by doing pbars. I could say class.progressBar dot set. No, actually, it would have to be p bars. It wouldn't. That would work. Bars dot set p bars dot main 1 and true. So this should be the same thing. Oh, maybe not. No value field progress bar. Ah, I can't spell. I missed an R. Let's try this one more time. Progress bar. That's where I fucked up. All right, and we see it does the same thing. So if I switch back over to our script here, so this is the same thing as writing p bars dot main set this. It is just a hell of a lot easier to say this object is going to perform this action rather than call the function that lives here on this object with these values. It's just it's kind of a shorthand way to write it. And it becomes really helpful when you have something complicated to keep up with. The great thing is this progress bars object is storing a lot of other information about itself so that it can do these things in a way that's more intuitive to think about it performing actions as a thing. So that, I think, explains at least the basic concept of what a object is good for. And I kind of just want to go through the process of writing an object from scratch. There are a couple of concepts that I'm not going to go into too deeply because they're kind of just deeper concepts on their own and kind of a pain to get too far into. But let me start with, I'm going to recreate something that lives in here, which is, all right, so I've got a class for DMX addresses, and I am going to, realistically, I'm not sure if there's a point in like necessarily going through it from, you know what, we're going to do it from scratch. We are going to do this from scratch. So copy all of this. We're not going to copy all of it. We're going to just use this description and we're going to build a new one. I'm going to have to revert this file at some point because I've saved over it by now. That's fine. So I'm going to create my classes up here. And just to explain, a class is a template. And I know I touched on it earlier. A class is a template from which you are building an object. So an object is a thing that has a bunch of properties that can perform certain actions. The class is kind of like, it's kind of like a mold that you build that thing from. You kind of define everything that it's going to have. And I'm going to go through the process of building one just to explain some easy things that you could get caught up on trying to make it work. Specifically, tables can be a pain in the ass in regards to this. So now, you know what? I'm going to use the color object instead because a color, the way that I've set it up, also contains IP address would work well as well. Executor. Do any of you contain tables? Oh, that's a whole can of freaking worms. Let's say color equals, let's find you, match case, here we go, class.color. I'm not going to get into all this because this includes some like conversion between HSV and RGB, and that just, it gets a little bit overly complicated. But I do want to demonstrate something that has a something that has tables in it to show some things to look out for. So I'm going to copy this for now. I'm not going to use all of it, but just to kind of show things we would be looking out for happening. Here we go. All right. So I'm just going to kind of keep that as my template, and we're going to start from there. Make sure I'm on the right window before I keep going. Yeah, it looks like I am. All right, cool. So I'm going to say, we're going to call it color. No, I'm just going to call it color equals, and I'm going to make it just a big old table. Okay. And first thing I want to do is just be keeping track of our constructor, and this is going to be how we're going to create a new instance of this thing. as well as methods, as well as, you know what, let's do this too. Okay. Oh no, oh no. I just wanted you to move up a little bit. All right, so just makes it a little bit. Huh. I don't know why my, oh, because I put a space in there. Like a noob. All right, constructor. And that is just going to be color new. And then optionally, it's a really intense set of parentheses, but RG. So we're going to set this up to where we could call this with a table that's just RG and B values. The square brackets are just indicating that it's optional and we could just create it empty. Methods, we're going to say, I don't need this anymore. We're going to say tostring. And this is a function that already exists in Lua. So if you were to say like, I don't know, tostring of the number 5, it'll give you a string that is the number 5, but it is a string rather than a number value. Or if you were to say tostring true, it will return the word true as 4 letters instead of the Boolean value true. So you can implement this as a custom function on a table. And I'm going to show how to do that. Honestly, I'm probably going to have to reference some of my own code to figure that out, because there's a lot of things that frankly I don't like necessarily remember. It's just like, okay, I know I figured it out once. If I go find the code where I did that, then like I'll use that. I don't spend too much time like trying to memorize every possible thing. If I use it enough, it gets memorized, and if I don't, then I look it up again. So we're going to implement the tostring color. Notice I'm not putting that as I'll usually put how it's called. That is not something you call the same way as a normal method. But I could do tostring as well, just to have that available as a normal method call. I can also have, let's say, what did I do here? Oh, I did have a mode. Okay. And then I would probably list out mode options, which would be, we'll copy and use hex and appearance. And we can see these are just different ways that I might be using a string conversion of this kind of object in a command somewhere. So these are, I think, common enough. Yeah, I don't have an HSV one in here. Let's see, what else do we have? I think that's maybe enough. I feel like I should have gone for the DMX table example, but that's fine. And then we'll say properties. I'm going to say .r, that's a number value, and .g is a number value, and .b is a number value. If I was going to go more in depth, again, you can see here that I went to HSV values, and I don't know if I put anything else in here. I did do like a whole different way of like that you could get different types of values out of it. Like I don't want to get that complex with this because I think that kind of just escapes the point. But anyways, this documents like anything that we are going to be doing with this. So if we ever need to go back into this, sorry, we know what we're working with. Okay, so let's start out with how we're going to make a new one. So we're going to say new equals function, and we're going to say table. We're just going to provide a table. Actually, I'm going to say args, because I think TBL is also a valid value that I put way up here. Yep. Okay. For my table functions. So I'm going to call that as a function and say end. And I'm just going to go ahead and list out all of these things that we can do with it now. Oops. Proper. Let's see. Tostring, I might actually have to come back to because I don't fully remember how to do that one, but I can say tostring equals function self end. And we are putting a comma in between these because, again, we're just declaring all of these as values inside of this table. At the end of the day, this is just a big glorified table. Not a it's just a table, but you've set it up to do a bunch of extra stuff from what you would normally use a table for. So we have tostring, and that's actually all we really have to add to the class. Now, one of the dangerous things that it took me a while to understand is that you don't want to do red. And like, for example, if you wanted to just default these all to 0, I don't want to do this. And the reason you don't want to do this is because if I was to say, and there's some very template script that you would set up. So I could say, let me go through how to generate the object, and then it'll make sense why this is a bad idea. So we're going to say local O equals, so this is our object. This is the table that we are ultimately going to return. We are going to say if args, then O.R equals args1, O.G equals args2. We're just going to assume that it would always be declared as like RGB, not, we're assuming that our table is coming in as something like this, not as something like this. This would not work with this code, and that is something you would want to account for. However, I'm trying to just keep it shorter, so we're not going to. So no.b equals args3. So we've assigned all of those to our table, and if not, if those didn't come in, actually, we're going to get rid of this O statement, or this if statement, sorry. So if there are no args, we're going to handle that now, and we're going to say local args equals the args table we got, or 0, 0, 0. Now what this means is that if args exists, this is kind of a shorthand syntax. If there is something other than nil here, then it will be assigned to this. If not, then the next value in line will be assigned. This is a really good way when you're building a function just to check to assign a default value. You can say the local version of that is either what was provided or something else. The only time this doesn't work is if being provided nil is a valid option, in which case you wouldn't want to have a default value. So we're going to set this up so that this always exists, whether it was provided or whether we provided the value inside of our function. So we've set our default red, green, and blue values, and now we are going to say set, this is where it's going to get a little bit hairy, and I don't want anybody to get too stressed out about this just yet. We're going to say set meta table. Oh, I screwed this up already. Self and args, because this is being called as a method. And we are going to set the meta table of O as this thing calling it. And I am going to explain what that means in just a moment. And self. Yeah, fuck it. Equals self. Okay, so what the crap do these two lines mean? Every table has what is called a meta table. Every value in Lua actually has one of these. It's just that, for example, all strings share one meta table, all numbers share one meta table. Every table, though, has its own, or can have a distinct meta table. And a meta table is just another table linked to your table that defines certain behaviors. If I pull up the Lua documentation now, it basically amounts to, let's see here. Let's open up our help thing. You basically have the entire Lua book included if you download the Lua interpreter. It's just easier to navigate as a book. So let's do meta tables. I'm sure I can make this bigger. Yeah, okay. Meta tables. Here we go. Okay. So I just wanted to pull this up. You can find this online. I don't want to get too in depth as to what all this does. I just was hoping it will show some of the options that the meta table has. And it does. It shows you math operations that you can define using the meta table, concatenation operator, basically what a lot of operators do when you're trying to work on the table. If you try to call the table as a function, you can define that behavior. Index and new index are the ones we're concerned with here. So index is the behavior that the table will provide when the index of that table that you're asking for doesn't exist. So if I am asking for a table, well, let's just say me equals Jason. Sure. So I can say print table.me, and we will get, oh, I've got to run it. If I do my syntax right, let's try that again. It will print my name. Cool. Now what happens if I tell it print table.u? Well, we will see that nil shows up because the index of u has not been defined for this. Now if I was, basically it's going to check the meta table. In this case, it's just whatever shows up by default and say, okay, what do we do since u doesn't exist? And right now that's not defined. But I could say, let's say, oh, u table equals, and we'll just say u equals, oh, I don't know, who wants to be in this? Michael, you're up. Cool, so that could be that table. If I set, first off, I need to define a meta table. Give me a second here because I feel like I'm doing a terrible job explaining this. Because the meta table and what it's going to reference for the meta table don't necessarily need to be the same thing. In what we're doing over here, they are, but they don't need to be. So I could, yeah, you know what, we're just going to go with it. I'm going to do set meta table of our original table with u table. And I'm also going to set the, nope, we're going to do this differently. Local meta is just a table. And we're going to say meta dot, and then the double underscore index equals u table. So when this meta table is called, asking for an index that didn't exist, right now we've told it check this table for that index. Meta tables can get a lot more involved. You can give it a function for this, so you can give it some very detailed behavior on what to do if the requested index doesn't exist. But for right now, I'm just going to say that the meta table of table is meta. So far, we haven't asked it to print anything else, so it's still going to do the same thing. Now I'm going to ask it, so we tried printing table.u, nothing happened. Now I'm going to try printing again table.u. And again, we know, because we just ran it here and it turned nil, that it does not have this value. But if I run this again, we can see that now it will find a value for that because it checked this table's meta table, and in there it went, okay, well, check this table, and this table just so happens to actually have that index. So now we actually have a value that will be returned when we're trying to access something that, if we're going to get on the technical level of what this table contains, doesn't exist. If I was to say for kv in pairs table do print v, so if I print the value from every key in this table, well, let me make this a little clearer because I know it's getting a little bit hairy. So after this line, only my name appears still. Even though I can call .u on this table, when it's iterating through the values that exist explicitly in this table, the other possible options don't show up because they're not a part of this table. They're a part of a table that is linked to it if that specific index is requested. Again, I know that's not going to make the most sense. What you need to understand from it basically is that if you include these two lines in your class and apply them to whatever table you're returning, it will in turn allow you to access everything from that class that created it. That is all I understood about it for 2 years of using it, and it was just fine. So if everything I just said for the last 5 minutes made no fucking sense, don't worry about it too much. What you need to know is that you need to include this line, and this particular variable has to be whatever table that you are going to return, which we should type that out, shouldn't we? So now we are definitely returning this new table that we've created. Now with all of that said, basically this just gives us access to the whole class without creating a full copy of it every time. There is the option, you could define all of this behavior inside of your new thing. So like inside of here, I could go and do tostring equals function self. And I could go ahead and define it in here. And that would also be totally valid. It is a much less efficient use of memory because every time I create a new one of these, it has its own copy of this tostring function. And if I've got, you know, as many functions as this have, or as some of my more complex classes will have, that'll eat up a lot of memory a lot faster. So it makes more sense if you're trying to pay attention to memory usage and not getting ridiculous with space that you're using, because eventually you can crash MA from using too much memory. If you're trying not to get ridiculous with it, this is a cleaner way for the console to handle it. And I don't know if it helps it perform faster or just keeps it from wasting memory, to be honest. But anyways, so that's what this is all for. Now, with that said, because of this behavior, because when you're referencing RGB and referencing this table's values, that's where we get into why this is a really, really bad idea. Anything that's shared should be something that any copy of the object would use in the same way. However, you don't want to store your values in here because, again, this color class, this table isn't changing. So if we're going to keep referencing back to the same parent class for a value that's supposed to belong to one copy of it, one object, that means that when we update one of our objects, they're all going to update because we're updating the same damn value, which is why you don't want any of your values in here. And in particular, any table that would hold something. So if we were to say, like, if you were going to hold like 3 values or something, I wouldn't want to say this would be equally bad. I think this actually be worse because now you have a shared reference within a shared reference. There's probably details as to why one's worse than the other, but they're both just not good. So anything that is going to be part of a table value, anything that's going to be unique to the object, you want to define when you're constructing it. Anything that you absolutely want to be different from one object to the next. You don't want to define it in the class, you want to define it in the constructor. If anybody's familiar with any other programming languages, this is not at all how you would work with a different language. And in a language like C++ or C#, you would define them outside of the methods. You would have no logical reason to do this inside of your constructor. Lua is different. Lua works a little bit funny. So you have to keep in mind the way that table references work to do something like this. Okay. And that's, I think, pretty much, let me read down my code again. That's pretty much it as far as this goes. So now we can define our tostring function. I know I kind of went down off in the left field there. So just to recap, we made our new table. Oh, we don't want that. Make a new table. We make sure our argument exists. We assign our red, green, and blue indexes. I could have condensed that a little bit, but it's fine. And then we set the meta table of our new object with self, which is, since we're calling this a method, which is going to be the class table. And then we're going to set the index value, which again is what we're using anytime we're calling for an index that doesn't exist in this. We're going to set it to, again, this table, which means that when we call tostring on an object and that table doesn't actually have a tostring value, it will look to class to perform this. One thing that is important to bring up is that, and I think we brought it up earlier, but it bears repeating given that we've talked about making objects here, is that self always refers to the object calling it. It's intended so that when you call it as a method, it's referring to whatever called the method. A source of confusion for me was trying to understand, okay, well, if it's calling up to this table, is this table what's going to get used for self? And it's not. It works more like it looks up to this table, sees that, okay, this index does exist, then it sends it back to the, this isn't actually how it works, but it's how you can think of it for functional purposes. You can think of it sending it back to this table back to this table to actually use it, which means self, if I was to call o.to_string, this would actually perform on O, not on color. It would act as if this method had always existed inside of this table and is acting upon O, which actually just reminded me that the only thing I need to do for this is tostring. Because if we look back at our documentation here, that was one of our, somewhere in here is the tostring thing. Anyways, I promise that's actually the thing that you use to implement a tostring method on it. And then I'll just say tostring equals function self, and we'll say return tostring self. Cool. Okay, and then to define tostring, I'm going to say we're going to do modes. And we're going to give this a... All right, so we'll figure out how to handle that here in a second. So our tostring method is going to be if mode equals, actually, if mode and mode equals, so I just made mode optional. So we're going to make the default appearance. So we'll make this one hex. Then, so I'm just going to build our skeleton here. Hex. Oh, for God's sake, what the hell am I doing? Hex string. And then I'm going to say else if not mode or mode equals appearance, then this could have been done with an else statement currently, but come on. All right, so there's our two defining ways that this can be called. If we're calling it in hex mode, or if we're calling it for an appearance string, and we're making the appearance one the default. I could have written this cleaner, but screw it. Okay, now we're going to return string.format, and we're going to say, oh, what the hell are we doing here? 2x, 2x, 2x. Oops. I don't know if I should zero pad these. I think this is right. Okay, so we're giving 2 spaces of hex notation for each color. And then I'm going to return self.red, self.green, self.blue. And when you start working with this, I think it starts to become a lot more apparent as to what the advantages are of trying to work in an object format, because understanding, oh, okay, I'm returning my being the object, red, green, then blue values in this format. Otherwise, we'll return string.format, and we'll say red equals a digit, green equals a digit, blue equals a digit, and again we'll do self.red, self.green, self.blue. And we'll just leave this without arguments as a default so that we know that if we just call, yeah, actually you can't call tostring with a mode. So we're gonna do this the other way around actually. I'm gonna move this over here and we're gonna say return to string self. Nope, self to string. No arguments, so that now we can call this with a mode. All right, let's give that a shot. So this one is referencing this one, just it's basically another way to access it if you're using more traditional Lua syntax, or if you need a more specified version of it, you can provide it a mode. Again, we can get a whole lot more in depth with it, but right now we're not looking for all that. So let's give this a test and see if I screwed anything up, which is entirely possible because I screw things up all the time. Okay. Do we have any questions? I know I have been ranting for a fucking long time, and somehow the viewer count's gone up, and that genuinely minorly baffles me. Okay. Let's see. We're going to say red is a color, and we're going to call the color classes new method. It's a little bit hard to talk about these like conventional classes because it's not a language that was built for handling actual classes, but anyways, we're going to call its new method, and we're going to give it the table 100 0 0. And I'm going to echo red to string, and we're going to provide the hex option. And actually, we're going to do one more. So it'll only get to these if this one, if neither of these existed. And I'm just going to use this to say if there's a mode but none of these were matched, we're going to say return okay. So probably wouldn't be the best way to handle it if you have some kind of an error, but no, take the whole screen. All right. So it's going to create an object, and then it's going to give me what was supposed to be. Oh, yep, it sure did give me the hex format of 100. Unfortunately for hex, I needed that to be scaled from 0 to 255. So let's go fix that. See, I knew I'd screw something up. All right. So let's break all these arguments into separate lines. So Lua is very not particular about what kind of white space you use in between elements. If white space can be used there and you're not in the middle of a string, anything goes. So you can just do a line break to list your arguments out. So in this case, I'm going to say this times 255. Yeah, actually, I'm going to do that exactly. And you know what, while I'm at this, I'm going to say math.max of this, just in case some rounding error takes it. Oh, actually 2.55 because I'm scaling it from 100 to 255. I'm going to give it a max value of math.min, sorry, the minimum of these two, just in case it somehow rounds to 256. I don't want it to provide an extra digit to this by going past FF, which would be 255. So delete these. And now we're just going to change this to G, change this to B. All right, let's give this a shot. So now if we print our, oh no, I screwed something up. Unexpected, so you can't see the other screen. Line 198, unexpected symbol. Probably this. All right, let's switch over to here. And now when I run it, it's still the same thing. Well, it could be that I edited the wrong damn thing. That would probably be a really good place to start. Because I edited the appearance one. Fuck. All right, let's just take all of this. Oh, for God's sake. I screwed up. All right, post that here, and then so this can go back to what it was. Self.red, self.green, self.blue. Okay, so now that I've edited the correct thing and fixed my parentheses, we're going to go back over here and we're going to give this one more shot. Let's hope it's one more shot. Oh my lord. 192. Number has no integer representation. Okay, so apparently I gave it a decimal and it didn't like that. So we're going to say math.floor of this, which should fix our rounding issues, honestly. And then we're green, and then we're blue, and I'm gonna save that. String.format does get very angry if you try to give something that is not already rounded to a nice zero number to it. Sorry, editing something else off screen real quick. I forgot that comma again. So if you try to give it 4.1 and tell it that it's an integer, it just will throw an error and shut down. FE. You know what? That's pretty. Should I have done math.ceiling? Oh well, it is getting close. Oh man, that's frustrating. Can I? Oh, there's ways to figure out how to round the damn thing, but there's no built-in rounding function is the annoying part. So the only way to like really do it would be to give it like a string.format, round it to 0 decimal places using a float, and then turn that back into a number and then provide that as an argument. It would work. I'm just going to count this as close enough because we got the concept across. I don't want to go so deep into semantics that we don't remember what the fuck we're doing. So there's that's some like basic principles on just how to build some kind of a class. Just to kind of go through, because I didn't think that was going to take nearly as long as that did. Let me pull up the progress bar class again. Okay. So just to show some of what this is doing, just kind of step through this and explain it. So let's just take a look at it. So when we create new progress bar, we're giving it a name, and it will call the MA function that starts a progress bar using that name. Then in that same table, so it created that inside of a table, so that table now has a field called handle. Inside that same table, we're going to go ahead and set a name, a text value. This isn't the cleanest way I could have written this out. This all could have been in the same table declaration, but I didn't. Anyways, that is what it is. So we set a whole bunch of fields that we will be using later, so we know those fields do exist. And again, since we are making this object a table and tables just reference memory, we didn't want to define these outside of the constructor. These are going to be unique to this particular object. We want them to belong to this table, not to the "oh, I don't exist" table. Then we set the meta table to itself so that any functions that are called that we set in this class will be accessible, even though they don't live in this. And then we returned that table. Self dot. This is some old code. This is a fucking mistake. That should not be there. Huh. Well, I guess you wouldn't notice because it already has that field, but yeah, that line shouldn't have existed. Okay. So then we have a bunch of functions that we've set, and again, I didn't document these worth of shit. So, so we have the option to set something, set a value. So we have a number that we can provide. Again, self is the implied first argument, so it's the table that's calling it. We have the number we're going to set to, and then we have what is a Boolean value called add. Again, I haven't documented this correctly, but this is set up so that if I provide a 1 and then say add, the progress bar is just going to increment by 1. And that's shown in this logic here. If add, which is to say if this exists and it's not false or nil, then this number value becomes our existing value, self.value, plus that number. It's just a one-line if-then command. Then we say number is math.floor of that, so we're going to round it to the nearest whole number down. If it's already a whole number, it's not going to go anywhere. Just if it's a decimal, it'll go to the nearest whole number below it. And then we will use the built-in MA function. So gma.gui.progress.set, we're going to use that handle value that we stored earlier, and we're going to set the progress bar assigned to that handle value to the number that we've just put together. And again, if this didn't exist, we're just going to skip over this step, and we're going to go straight on to rounding this down and setting the value. Just by explaining that, I hope it is already becoming clear why objects are valuable, because just being able to say p bar set, and let's just call it 5, is a hell of a lot easier than saying gma.gui.progress.set. Then we're going to say p bar, let's say we call it p bar main handle 5. Or if we were going to increment by 1, that would have become, we're going to set it to I don't know, current p bar val, which is a separate variable we would be keeping track of. Whereas if we just call this, it'll automatically keep track of, okay, our current value is already here. We're going to step that up by 1 and assign that as the new value. It's just a hell of a lot easier to look at this and understand what's going on than that. Yeah, in my opinion, and being an ADD squirrel who has the memory of a fucking goldfish sometimes, I feel like, you know, if it makes my life easier, then that opinion isn't completely worthless, but that's my opinion. Set range. You just grab that progress bar item and say, we're just going to say p bar set range. And we already saw this earlier, 0 to, let's say, 100. And that's our entire command. And it is in the background handling this for you. So it's, again, finding that handle, which is a big old number, and setting the bottom and top values of that. As we get farther down, we'll start seeing where this really starts to shine. Set text, again, we're just calling, it's more of a shorthand than anything. Rename, this one becomes something. So you can't change the name of a progress bar once you've created it. So what I set up here was that we stop the existing progress bar. We create a new progress bar with the new name. We set our current name to the name that we provided to this argument. And then if we already had a range established, then on that new progress bar we just created, we're going to set that same range. The only thing I forgot to do in here, now that I'm looking at it, because clearly I haven't used it, would have been to then go and say, well, there would have to be a value, so then we would say dupe and self dot value. So now we can set that same progress bar to the value that we had originally. So we reset our range to that range, we reset our value to that value, and all of that happened just by calling a function like pbar rename new name. That's it. That's all you had to do for that, and it handles all of this in the background for you. So, I mean, again, you do have to go through and write all this out and figure out how to do this, but you only have to do it once, and then your code becomes so much more readable. I did this on a timecode object or a timestamp object for like just being able to handle like incrementing by a frame or incrementing by a second on something that has hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And the amount of logic that you need for that, it's just a lot easier to say timestamp increment +1 or -1 than having to go through and figure out the math every single time you need to work with it. So yeah, I put a pause function in there, so it kills the progress bar, but saves all your information still exists, so that when you want to resume it, you just say resume. It creates a new progress bar that has all of that information, and you can treat it as if it was that same progress bar. Logically, the way you're thinking of it, it is that same progress bar still. But like if I need to prompt a user for something in the middle of a progress bar running, the progress bar stomps on top of whatever other user input, so I need it to go away for a little bit. This stuff wasn't super useful, but yeah. So to the people watching, does the concept of what objects are useful for and the basics of using them make sense? Give that a second to sit, and I'm going to look through our notes at what else we were talking about. We're going to look at doing. Is anybody still alive? Still got a few people up here. Oh crap. Oh, why did I make this unlisted? That was a mistake. Oh well, I guess I can't edit that now, can I? Nope, because it's already running. Boo. Oh. Thoughts in the comments. Okay. And yes, it is a bit complex to set up. Michael has mentioned. I will point out that, oops, that's the wrong thing. Those are notes. Where'd my, there it is. So where this becomes kind of really helpful for me is, and maybe where I started really using it later, once I figured out the concept, is class.macro. So when making macros, if I go into our preset grid generator, I can say, let's find somewhere that I've used this thing. All right. So for example, if I am making a new macro, and I just want to be able to assign, for example, I want to make a new macro. I want to tell where that macro is going to be stored. I want to tell you what the name of it's going to be. This is just some construction information, and I can also just set the info in here. I can then just go through one line at a time and say macro new line, here's the command. Macro new line, here's the command. Macro new line, here's the command. Here's, okay. Okay. I see I implemented a string.format thing in here. So here's the command, here's the wait time. Here's a new line, here's the command, and it looks like that's the whole thing. I can set the info for each one. For me to program this after that class has been built, this I feel like is fairly intuitive to look at. You can just look at it and go, okay, there's a new line here. Here's what the command is, or there's a new line here, here's the command, and it's going to have a wait time of 3. That is pretty intuitive to look at. So yes, it is more work to look at on the front end, but it saves you from every time you want to go make a new macro, having to have a function built where you are going in and handling shit like, this import command never got used. So write, for example, handling, replacing, symbols with their XML equivalents. Building the XML script, building the header of it, adding in any info items for the macro. This is not even close to the cleanest that I've set up a script writing thing so far. But then it goes and iterates through all the lines, it finds the commands, figures out what XML stuff to add into it. There's a lot that goes on in here for it to write a macro. But this allows me the flexibility to build a macro with anything that you could export and import as an XML file. This can do, which is what I want. I don't want to have to be thinking about, oh God, I need my macro to have quotes in it. Without being able to import as an XML file, you're dead in the water. I have yet to find a different way. Maybe MA3 will have something, but MA2 does not. So you have to import an XML file, and rather than just having like a table that I build that there's room for me to screw up how I formatted that table, I have fixed methods instead. Where I say, okay, macro object, new line, command is this. Macro object, new line, command is this, weight is this. And I know that's all going to get stored in that object correctly, so that when I tell it to write, all of this logic, where did it go? All of this logic that's involved in writing it will execute the way it was intended to, because I've already tested this once with all of these known fields, and I know that when I added these new lines in, the way that I know that when I added these new lines in using the syntax I approved for myself, that it will work. So yes, it is a bit complex. I definitely suggest starting with something a little bit simpler for understanding the concept, but it has a lot of room for just being helpful. Do I have that in the wrong file? I would encourage, like, if you're trying to wrap your head around it, maybe start off trying to write, let's see. Okay, so like right here, I've got all of the code for this DMX address, and I just posted, I think, this full thing to the MA2, MA3 Luau users group. Lost my thought. Right, all of this code, so you can go reference that, and I would encourage like figuring out how to write this from scratch, to get you in the mindset of how an object works, because, or maybe even just writing a table first, writing the object directly without writing a class with a constructor without this new function on it, just understanding that first, and then getting into this. Then getting into using a class. But it is a very helpful concept, and it has been, for me, being able to handle that has just, I don't know if exponentially increased is maybe a bit of exaggeration, but it is widely opened up the possibilities of what I can do with Luau, because once you can start working with that kind of logic, once you can start looking at things as objects that have a behavior rather than just an interaction of a bunch of variables, it is a lot easier to create code that is clean and maintainable. For anybody that's not familiar with the color effects engine that I've got on my site, which, I mean, it is 100% just based off a Christian Jackson color thing, but somebody had asked me to build it, and I built it. So if CJ's watching this, like, I genuinely hope that doesn't like come across the wrong way, because it definitely wasn't supposed to be like stealing shit. But that was their inspiration for the idea. Sorry, I'm trying to find things and talk at the same time. Okay, so like this has been something that some requests got made on this plugin for making it a little bit easier to work with. I'm not entirely sure why I opened the source code on it, because there's just not much that's going to be worth trying to even explain what's going on. But the way it was originally written was just a big interaction of a bunch of variables. And when this user asked me to implement a new feature on it, I went to try to update it, and I realized there was just so much shit going on that it was kind of beyond the scope of something that I could update without having to relearn how it was written. And that's just not a sustainable way to write something that can become more complex. So I like I'm still in the middle of just kind of rewriting this entire thing so that it is something that I can just look at and have a quick documentation of like, here's the available fields that can be used, here's the available methods that can be called on it, and go, okay, so like if I want to add this in, here's where this information is stored. All I have to do is create a new method that does this, and it works. I do highly encourage the concept of object-oriented programming isn't necessarily intuitive to me. I feel like it is now, but I also remember that I struggled like wrapping my head around it when I started. It's just kind of hard for me to like reverse that. And it's like trying to remember what it was like to suck on a console and not know where to find the patch menu. Like once you get so used to it, it's like, oh wait, no, I used to really fucking suck at this. So like, it definitely is an overwhelming topic to look at. It's kind of a new way of like looking at programming. I definitely encourage, like, if it's something you want to get into, work on other programming languages, because there's a lot of resources out there for other languages. If you go into, I have been thoroughly pleased working with C#. I have enjoyed that it is a strictly typed language, which just means that it has, more or less, it has a lot less leniency on how variables are used than something like Lua. A lot of people hate that about it. Python is also one that there is so much out there. Like I think especially on a non-professional level, I think Python has been the number one, like, most popular language for quite a few years now by a wide margin. And even in professional settings is still I think it's still like top 4 or 5. So Python is a really good one if you look into object-oriented classes on that. Udemy has a lot of resources on that. Any of those learning sites, I can't remember them all, Coursera, Lynda, they're all going to have courses on other languages that will explain concepts that you can use here. The flip side is, like, for me, I wouldn't have been able to get, oh, we're going off into tangents. Sure, let's do that. I'm just going to leave this for a minute here. So for me, it was getting into programming was, and for those who had not seen the shirt, I will reiterate, this was going to Goodwill, and I had it, and I remembered about 5 minutes before the stream started, and I figured, what the fuck, I might wear it for a second time since high school. But anyways, like for me, getting into programming, getting into coding, I had toyed with it a little bit before I started doing MA plugins, but I didn't really like get into it until I was starting to work with Lua with MA, just because I had a purpose. I had things that I was trying to get done with it. I wasn't following a course like, oh, here's how I program in Lua. I was just going through and like, oh, well, I wanted to do this. Like I was just trying to make, at first, just a macro that would make other macros, because I needed like 64 of some macro for a launch pad. I was like, well, I don't want to write this fucking thing 64 times and then realize, oh, I want to change something about it. So I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I automate that? And I think that was just when Lua was getting, like, it was version 3.1, so Lua had just showed up for MA. But yeah, just trying to find things that, like, I wanted to get done. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, like, getting into code, is just trying to figure out, like, well, it's hard to just follow a course that doesn't really feel like it's taking you anywhere. Like, I'm in the middle of a web development course now, and like just getting through the HTML and CSS, I was like, okay, it's not complicated, but god damn it, it's boring. I'm sure as I get farther into it, it will be less boring, but like it's hard to kind of get over the hurdle of just like learning a bunch of concepts with no application, versus when you are like actively working on trying to learn how do I make this happen. It kind of gives you an end goal to be pursuing, and then you kind of start digging into resources. It becomes less of an idea of like, oh, what should I be following to get better at this, and more of a, oh, I want to learn this. Like, you get on Google and you start, at least I kind of start figuring it out by default as a I don't want to say by default, but like as a response to that, as a response to a need. And I think for me, that's always been a lot more valuable of a way to learn. It's always just like, oh fuck, I know I can make it do that. Like I will sit here and bash my head on the keyboard for 3 hours, but I'm going to figure out how to make it do that. It's maybe not always healthy, but that's how I've learned, and that's the only way I can explain to other people to help them get into it, to try to learn some of these things, is just finding things that you're trying to get accomplished, because that then leads to the right questions, and it leads to the desire to get them answered. So yeah, I see some other comments have showed up. Gotcha. And to Extreme Tech's point, comments are right in front of my face. There are, like, if you're trying to figure out more intuitive ways to get to get like strings interpolated, you can look up string interpolation in Lua, and people have written functions that will make it act more similarly to some of those other languages that just natively support something where you can just type the name of the variable into the middle of the string and it will show up there. I've still been preferential to string.format. It's honestly, I've kind of preferred the way that it keeps everything really condensed to look at the string that you're building. But I also do really like the interpolation approach, which is just having a way to insert that name right in the middle of the string. What else? Do we have any particular questions? I've done a lot of kind of just talking. I'm looking through my notes for this, and I think I've covered most of what I wanted to. For anybody who's uncertain of how the of how this ... ellipsis works, if I go over here, it's called a vararg or vararg expression. This just means that you can provide an indeterminate number of arguments, and you can have like arguments before this, and then just kind of do a catch-all at the end. You just can't have anything after the catch-all, because the catch-all catches all. So that's totally valid. And basically, once you have set this up, you can then capture that as an array in here, or if you have another function you're going to pass it to that just uses this ellipsis, you can just pass it straight to that. So if I'm using string.format and I've detected that it is something, or really this should be like else if t1 type of t1 equals string, because I should make sure that I'm passing a string to string.format. That would be the intelligent thing to do. But anyways, you can pass those variable number of arguments to another function that takes a variable number of arguments. I was gonna get into parsing through big XML files, but honestly my voice is starting to kind of give out. One thing I did want to bring up that's just been really helpful to me is just some extensions that I've been using lately, and this has actually come straight out of that web development course. Yeah, Michael, see you later. Glad it was helpful. There's some extensions that I've been using that I wanted to point out real quick. Better comments. This has been super helpful. I don't want to open the plugin because it was a private hired, or I don't want to go into the source code, but I can pull up the beginning of it here without it being so. Oh hush. There, things like this, where go away. So just by adding certain tags to the beginning of my code, I can change the way it shows up. So if I start it with 2 slashes, I can have it as a crossed out item. If it starts with to do, it will show up in this orange text. If there's enough hyphens in there, it'll start having this white background, which is what we were seeing in these dividers earlier. I set it up just so these dividers would stick out more. I don't know. There's a whole range of things you can do with it. There's a question, which I've kind of bastardized the original version of that. You can do an exclamation point to make something show up in red. So if I've got something that's like I need to come back and pay attention to it, you can do that. So basically it just allows you to format your comments just by changing a tag at the beginning of them. And I've just found that super, super helpful for navigating comments. Another one has been bracket pair colorizer. And it does exactly what it sounds like it does. You may have noticed on my screen as I've been typing things, like my brackets will, or any parentheses will show up in different colors. I've got purple starting here. I've got blue inside of that, and it does an underline as well. I don't know if that shows up on the stream, but it does an underline over the whole range of that, or in this case, it kind of does this like arc around thing. In the case of this bracket, we've got one that's encapsulating all of this color table, and it makes it real easy to keep track of like what is being encapsulated by what. So if you've got like 5 sets of parentheses going, I don't know why you'd have this many parentheses at once, but it allows you to keep track of which ones are closed and like just more easily see what's being surrounded by what, to say it for the 4th time. Those are, I think, really the only big ones I've been using. I know a lot of people are using, there's another, I want to say Zero Brain as a text editor. I to be honest, only very briefly tried it and was having issues with it and gave up very quickly. So I don't want to shit talk it. If you're using something else, that's fine. I've been using Visual Studio Code. Oh Lord, I've been using Visual Studio Code, and I've been enjoying it thoroughly, especially with all of the extensions that are available for it. If other people use other things, I have no interest in like shit talking other things. This has just been working really well for me. Do we have any other questions, or have I just talked the fucking life out of people? Oh, where the hell? I don't even know how to navigate my computer at this point. I'm trying to think, maybe just as a closing thing, because I mentioned like trying to get into it with like things that you can do on an MA. I know one of the early ones I did was just like a DMX value scanner that allowed me to toggle states of something, just checking a DMX value. That only works when you have DMX parameters. I'm trying to think of other things. You could, a really good way to like just get into like working with loops or something, you could like try to provide a group number and some preset numbers and have it build Q stacks, make a different Q stack of each group at each preset, or rather a different Q stack for each group, and each Q is a different preset. It's a good way to get in the loops. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have anything that's much more helpful than just like explore and just kind of dive into it and see what you can try to find a need for. I can definitely start posting some things up to the website or to the Facebook page as they come to mind. So yeah, to everybody, especially everybody out in Europe who is up this late still, good night. And yeah, to everybody else who checked it out, feel free to leave me any comments with any comments on here or on Facebook or wherever. Any comments, any ideas with things that you want to see in other videos and other tutorials and other live streams. I'm not likely to do a whole bunch of other Luau ones just because I know it's a very niche, a very small group of people who are working on it. I want to try to provide things that are a little more helpful to the wider community. But if there are other things, if there's any particular concepts for beginning into Lua that I can help for, feel free to send those ideas my way. Otherwise, I'm gonna head off here, and you all have a and just in time, the signature take a shot, shut the fuck up glass just showed up, so I am going to and shut the fuck up. I don't know what that was, but it wasn't vodka. Okay, I'm out. Have a good night, day, whatever, everybody.